Police beat black teen into a coma. Community fights for justice. A piercing scream shattered the humid summer air, and in that single moment, the hushed tension that had simmered beneath the surface of the neighborhood erupted into chaos. The lights from squad cars flickered across the battered pavement, painting fractured red and blue images on everything in sight. People stood on their porches, wide-eyed, breath-quivering, unable to pull themselves away from the horrifying spectacle. It was late, an hour when families usually dozed off under the soft glow of televisions, and streets emptied except for a passing car or two. But on this muggy night, the entire block was roused by the sounds of conflict. On the ground, pinned by two uniformed police officers, lay 17-year-old Sean, a skinny kid with broad shoulders, dark skin that glistened with sweat under the streetlights, and hazel-brown eyes that until that night had always held a spark of youthful curiosity. Now those eyes brimmed with fear, and behind it a desperate bewilderment. As more onlookers gathered, some holding their phones, others frozen in disbelief, the officers rained down blows with fists and batons. The sickening thud of each strike felt like a blow to the heart of the entire community. No one could believe it was happening, but it was. "Stop," someone yelled, voice cracking. "He's just a kid." Another woman's sobs cut through the din as she reached out, trembling, wanting to intervene but too terrified to cross the line of uniformed men. One officer, tall and broad, sweat staining the band of his navy blue cap, pressed his knee into Sean's back. The other, equally formidable, kept shouting, "Stop resisting," over and over, as though the words themselves could justify the savage force. The crowd, thickening by the second, watched helplessly. Some bystanders had tears rolling down their cheeks, while others stood stiffly, fists clenched by their sides. A baby wailed in the background, a dissonant lullaby that could do nothing to quell the brutality. Sean whimpered, and then there was a dreadful crack as a baton connected with his temple. The teen's arms went limp. Blood trickled across the pavement. Someone gasped so loudly it cut through the night air like a blade. The wail of approaching sirens grew louder, but it was too late for them to be of any help. Sean's body jerked once more, then went completely still. A hush fell over the small crowd. No one moved as backup patrol cars screeched to a halt. Officers rushed out, adding more swirling lights and more frantic voices to the scene. Shouting commands blurred into echoes, but the battered boy lay motionless, chest hardly rising. Every second stretched into an eternity. In the next instant, paramedics emerged, pushing through the tangle of uniforms. People parted like waves for them, some covering their mouths in horror at the sight of so much blood on the concrete. The paramedics lifted Sean's limp body, his head lolling to the side. The crowd erupted again, anguished yells, pleading demands for answers, cries of outrage. Yet the two officers who had attacked Sean remained stone-faced, their bodies bristling with a defensiveness that clung to them like heavy armor. The onlookers felt the invisible wall that so often separated them from law enforcement. It was as though an entire gulf had opened up between them, and with it, a sense of betrayal that would not easily be undone. Paramedics loaded Sean into the ambulance, doors slammed shut, and the vehicle sped away, red lights pulsing like a frantic heartbeat. For a while, the block stood in stunned silence. The officers, after exchanging terse words, began to force the dispersal of the crowd, pushing them away from the bloodstain on the sidewalk. It was only when everyone had retreated to dimly lit porches and shuttered windows that the magnitude of the event sank in. A young black teen, known to everyone in the neighborhood as a good kid, a basketball enthusiast, an aspiring artist, had been beaten by police until he was unconscious. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire, fueled by the few blurry videos posted on social media. The footage showed the worst of it, officers striking Sean over and over, a dozen bystanders yelling for them to stop. The media picked up the story, replaying the grainy clips on the evening news. Outrage swelled across the city, and local activists, who had long been working in the background, took the lead in organizing. They demanded justice, transparency, and an urgent reevaluation of policing practices in the community. But the fight had only just begun. Everyone understood that. In some city precincts, stories like Sean's faded into bureaucratic darkness. Evidence disappeared, testimonies changed, official narratives twisted the facts. It was a dangerous maze that threatened to swallow the truth. Yet this time, something felt different. There was a mounting sense of determination and unity within the community, and with that unity came hope. Across town, in the stark, white-walled corridors of General Hospital, Sean lay in a coma. Machines beeped and tubes ran from his arms. His parents, Jennifer, and scarcely left his bedside, the vigil wearing them down. Their once bright, laughing eyes were now red-rimmed with heartbreak and exhaustion. They talked to their son, hoping he could hear them somehow, hoping he would wake up and reassure them this was all a terrible dream. Jennifer would sit next to her son and whisper, "Baby, I'm here. We're all here. Can you hear me? Please just squeeze my hand if you can." But Sean's fingers never twitched, his eyelids never fluttered. Sometimes she'd place her head on his chest, listening for the steady thump that proved he was still alive. And she would quietly sob, worrying if each breath might be his last. Usually a stoic man, carried his tears in silence. He'd stand by the window, looking out at the city lights with a quiet rage brewing inside him. He replayed the scenario in his head, imagining all the ways it could have been different. If he had simply told Sean to come straight home from basketball practice, if he had decided to pick him up that evening. If the weight of those regrets clung to him, threatening to pull him under, but they found they were not alone. Outside the hospital, a growing assembly of supporters gathered each day. Extended family, friends, teachers, church members, and even strangers who had been moved by the story. They came holding signs like "Justice for Sean" and "We Stand Together." They prayed, sang hymns, and provided food for the. They offered gentle hugs when Jennifer ventured out to get some air. They listened too, tried to soothe his fury with kind words, though no words could truly quell the storm inside him. Each day, local activists, led by a woman named Trish Moore, a fiery community organizer known for her unrelenting commitment to justice, spoke to the media. She demanded the city hold the officers accountable. She demanded the release of all body camera footage. She demanded the prosecution of those responsible for attacking an unarmed teenager. And slowly, the city's political apparatus began to feel the strain. The mayor's office, once dismissive of incidents like these, started to offer measured responses to the press. The police chief appeared at a press conference, delivering a carefully worded statement about transparency and department review. Yet none of it truly addressed the raw violence documented on those videos. Meanwhile, the residents of Sean's neighborhood grappled with the lingering trauma. School kids who had once greeted each other with playful shouts now walked quietly past the spot where Sean had been pinned to the ground. Older neighbors, who once believed the city was making progress, found themselves haunted by old memories of police brutality. Local business owners noticed the tension in the air, customers discussing the beating in hushed voices. And in it all, a deep and resounding fear. If it could happen to Sean, it could happen to anyone. Weeks inched by. Sean remained in a coma. The doctors explained that his injuries were severe: swelling in the brain, multiple fractures, internal bleeding. They could not predict if, or when, he would regain consciousness. Medical bills soared, each passing day adding to the financial burden for the. But the community's generosity flowed, with donations pouring into a crowdfunding page set up to help. Despite the fear, anger, and uncertainty, a remarkable unity began weaving through the neighborhoods. Racial and ethnic lines blurred as families of all backgrounds came together, united by a simple, heartbreaking truth. A child lay in a hospital bed, beaten nearly to death by those sworn to protect him. In the quiet hours of the night, when hospital traffic slowed and nurses walked the halls in soft footsteps, Jennifer often drifted to sleep by Sean's side. She dreamt of him as a toddler, running around in diapers, giggling with unbridled joy. She remembered how his tiny fingers once wrapped around hers, how his big eyes shone with innocence. Every memory sharpened her anguish. Sometimes she'd jolt awake, only to see the tubes and machines, as though colliding with a nightmare she could never escape. Her tears would flow again, a cycle of grief and longing without end. It was at this juncture that Trish Moore approached with a plan, a massive community rally in front of City Hall. She explained that the city officials would be forced to take notice if enough people spoke up, and if the media spotlight was intense. Jennifer was hesitant at first. Her entire world revolved around the beeping monitors and her son's silent form, but the anger in his heart fueling him insisted they had to do something. "We need justice for Sean," he said, voice trembling, "and for every other parent who prays their child will come home safe." Within days, the rally was organized. Flyers appeared across the city, pinned to bulletin boards in barbershops, laundromats, churches, and convenience stores. Community members spread the word online, each share on social media accompanied by the harrowing images of the battered teenager. The momentum built, unstoppable as a rising tide. Local activists teamed up with national civil rights groups, and soon, even some celebrities chimed in, sharing the story with millions of followers. On the day of the rally, throngs of people filled the streets leading to City Hall. Signs bobbed in the crowd, reading "Enough is enough" and "Stop police brutality." A sea of determined faces stared up at the podium set before the grand marble staircase. Cameras panned over the crowds, capturing the chanting, the tears, the righteous fury. Trish Moore took the stage first, her booming voice carrying over the roar. She recounted the events leading up to Sean's beating, condemning the brutality and demanding accountability. The crowd roared approval. Next came a series of speakers, community elders, local pastors, even young people who had grown up with Sean. Their voices cracked with emotion as they shared personal experiences of racial profiling and harassment by law enforcement. Every story spilled into another, weaving a collective narrative of pain, fear, and frustration long kept beneath the surface. Finally stepped up. The crowd hushed, sensing the weight of his grief and anger. He cleared his throat, fighting the tears that threatened to choke him. "My son," he began, voice unsteady, "is fighting for his life in a hospital bed. He should be in his senior year of high school, thinking about college or a scholarship or even just a pickup basketball game with his friends. But instead, we are sitting by his bedside, praying he will even open his eyes again." He paused, gaze sweeping across thousands of upturned faces. "To anyone who has the power to make a difference," he said, "do something. We need justice, and we need it now." An echo of cheers and clapping followed. Some people cried openly, moved by the rawness of his plea. Reporters jostled to capture the moment on camera, to record each word he spoke. After the rally, the group submitted a petition with thousands of signatures demanding charges against the officers. Trish Moore, flanked by prominent community leaders, marched right into City Hall and refused to leave until they had delivered the petition to the mayor personally. That afternoon, the mayor, a middle-aged politician known for his polished speeches, called a press conference. Under pressure, with the entire city watching, he announced that both officers involved in Sean's beating had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. While it was not the definitive justice people wanted, it was a start, a small crack in the seemingly impenetrable wall that shielded misconduct from consequences. In the days that followed, frustration continued to boil beneath the surface. Administrative leave was a band-aid, an all-too-familiar refrain in cases of police brutality. Protesters gathered at City Hall each evening, pressing for an official indictment. Suspicion hovered like a dark cloud that the police department would try to orchestrate some narrative that absolved the officers of blame. A new wave of social media campaigns emerged, urging people to keep the heat on city officials and not allow the case to fade into obscurity. Meanwhile, in the hush of General's intensive care unit, Sean still lay comatose. His condition remained critical, though doctors said he was stable enough to undergo a delicate procedure to alleviate pressure on his brain. When Jennifer asked about the odds of recovery, they could offer only cautious optimism. Each day carried a slim hope that he might awaken, but there were no guarantees about what he would be like, whether he could speak, walk, or remember what had happened. Outside the hospital, a rotating cast of community members kept vigil. They set up a small table with bottled water and snacks for supporters. Newspapers stacked up at the table, each day's headlines reflecting the evolving story. OFFICRS-ON leave amid investigation. Community DEMANDS police accountability. Mayor ADDRSSES systemic CONCRNS. Jennifer would pass by those papers, flinching every time she saw her son's photo plastered across the front page, but also feeling a grim determination. She knew the publicity was crucial if they were ever to see any semblance of justice. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the hospital parking lot, Jennifer found sitting alone on a bench. He stared at his hands, silent. She approached, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" she asked, though she knew the answer. He shook his head slowly. "I keep thinking about the night it happened, thinking I should been there." His voice was raw, like a wound that refused to heal. "I can't sleep, Jen. I see his face every time I close my eyes." She sat next to him, slipping her hand into his. "Me too," she admitted, "but it's not our fault. We raised him right. He was just wrong place, wrong time, or maybe it was any place, any time." Her voice trembled, revealing a fear that this could have happened under any circumstance. Exhaled a heavy breath, tears threatening to spill. I'm afraid for every kid in this neighborhood, every black kid especially. What do we do, Jen? How do we protect them from something like this ever happening again? She closed her eyes, her heart pounding with the shared weight of their anguish. We fight, she said softly, recalling Trish Moore's fierce spirit. We don't stop until something changes. He nodded, jaw clenched, and wrapped an arm around her. The couple sat there in silence, their hearts beating in unison under the sinking sun. As the weeks pressed on, the city's legal machinery sputtered into motion. The district attorney's office announced it would convene a grand jury to review evidence against the two officers. Public attention peaked, with crowds gathering outside the courthouse, chanting and carrying signs. Each day, news crews filmed the lines of people waiting outside, hoping to overhear any scrap of information. Social media erupted with discussions, heated debates, and emotional testimonials. Petitions circulated. It felt like the entire city was on edge, waiting to see if the justice system would work in this case, or fail like so many times before. Inside the district attorney's office, tensions ran high. The DA, a stern woman named, was known for her uncompromising style. She had built her career on tough prosecutions, but it was no secret she had faced pressure from the police union and certain political circles to evaluate all the facts carefully, an unspoken code for don't go too hard on these officers. On the other hand, the outcry from the community was enormous, forcing her to weigh the ramifications of not bringing charges. Either path had the potential to end her career, but only one path seemed right. So she pushed her team of investigators to move forward diligently, collecting statements, analyzing police body cam footage, reviewing the videos, and interviewing witnesses. To complicate matters, the official police reports from that night told a vastly different story than what the videos showed. The officers insisted Sean had resisted arrest, that he was belligerent, that they feared for their safety. But the crowd's testimonies contradicted those claims, describing a frightened teenager who never threw a punch or even tried to flee. Bodycam footage, partially obstructed or conveniently turned off at certain moments, only added to the confusion. The question hung in the air: were these officers acting out of fear, or was it just raw aggression fueled by bias? Through a relentless push by the community and the mounting evidence, the grand jury convened. The city braced for a decision, and a hush fell on the anxious masses. After several days of closed-door deliberations, the grand jury returned with an indictment on charges of aggravated assault and official misconduct. The announcement that the officers would stand trial sent a jolt of electricity through the city. Protesters danced in the streets, hugging one another in relief. Others held their breath, knowing that an indictment was not a conviction. The fight was far from over. Meanwhile, Sean's condition took a sudden turn. Hospital staff rushed to stabilize him when he developed a fever and signs of infection. The tension in the waiting room became almost unbearable as a wave of panic swept over everyone who had kept vigil. Doctors once again offered guarded optimism, but no promises. Jennifer, clinging to her faith, prayed aloud, tears streaming by her side, every muscle in his body rigid as though bracing for an impact. And then, after a harrowing 48 hours, the infection subsided. Sean's vitals stabilized, but he still did not wake. The trial's date was set for mid-autumn. Leading up to it, the city witnessed a surge in dialogues about policing, race relations, and systemic inequality. Forums were organized in community centers. Churches opened their doors to gatherings where people of all faiths and backgrounds came to talk, to vent, to grieve, and to heal. Some city council members, pressured by the public, proposed reforms: mandatory bodycam policies with strict penalties for turning them off, citizen review boards with actual power, de-escalation training, and more comprehensive oversight. Critics argued these measures were too little, too late. Advocates insisted it was a first step, though a small one. In the middle of it all, they became unwilling public figures, the face of a fight they never asked for. Once a quiet family man who coached youth basketball, now spoke at rallies. Jennifer, who had dedicated herself to a small catering business, found herself on national news, her voice trembling as she pleaded for her son's recovery and for systemic change. Their every word carried the weight of not just their pain, but the pain of a community. Autumn arrived, crisp winds replacing the summer's oppressive heat. Leaves on the old maple trees lining the streets turned fiery red and gold. This transformation felt symbolic, as if the city itself was shedding old layers, standing on the brink of a new era. Yet underlying the changing season was a palpable tension as the trial neared. On social media, threats and hateful remarks also surfaced. Trolls accused Sean of being a thug, painting him as a delinquent to justify the officer's actions. But the community came to his defense, flooding the public sphere with photos of him volunteering at the local youth center, playing in the church band, smiling in countless family pictures. They around his memory, determined not to let him become just another statistic. The day the trial began, the courthouse steps overflowed with reporters, activists, onlookers, and police union members. A line stretched around the block. They arrived accompanied by Trish Moore, who had become something of a surrogate family member through her steadfast support. The air was fraught with the weight of potential change. Inside, the proceedings began methodically. The prosecution laid out a harrowing narrative of police violence. They played the videos for the jury, the courtroom going deathly silent except for the echoing sounds of the baton striking flesh, Sean's muffled cries, the urgent pleas from the crowd. Every blow reverberated through the courtroom, leaving many spectators in tears or shock. The defense countered with claims of chaotic conditions, confusion, threat perception, and the typical argument that officers feared for their lives. The question of excessive force hung in the balance. Witnesses took the stand. Neighbors recounted in chilling detail how Sean had not been resisting, how he had raised his hands before he was struck. One man, a local mechanic, struggled to keep composure as he described seeing the baton crash onto Sean's head. The defense questioned the reliability of the witnesses, trying to plant seeds of doubt. Bodycam footage, partial as it was, played next. The moments it captured still showed enough to make it clear that Sean had not thrown any punches or attacked. Yet the defense insisted the angle was deceptive, that context was missing. Each day, the courtroom filled to capacity, and each evening, news reports analyzed the day's testimony. The nation's eyes turned to this small city, waiting to see if the justice system would deliver a meaningful verdict or revert to the all-too-common pattern of acquittal. The officers themselves sat at the defense table, faces drawn, occasionally shaking their heads at the evidence. Some wondered if they felt remorse, fear, or simple defiance. Their attorneys, flanked by a support team paid for by the police union, fought each piece of evidence with vigor. They rarely spoke to the media during the trial. They were often too emotionally drained to face the barrage of questions and cameras. Jennifer would clutch a small photograph of Sean as a little boy, smile radiant, eyes shining with innocent curiosity. Often rubbed his temples, tension lines marking his face. They prayed that justice would be served, but they also prayed each night by Sean's bedside, whispering, "Please wake up." After 2 weeks of impassioned testimony, forensic analysis, and emotional court scenes, the case went to the jury. In those agonizing days of deliberation, the entire city felt like it was holding its breath. Tensions soared. Police presence around the courthouse increased. Everyone anticipated that the verdict, whatever it was, could ignite either celebration or fury. Finally, the jury returned. The courtroom was packed, not a single seat or piece of standing room left. The judge's stern expression betrayed nothing. As the jury foreperson stood to read the verdict, the air was electric. "On the count of aggravated assault," the foreperson said, voice subdued yet echoing across the silent room, "we find the defendants guilty." Gasps and sobs filled the air. Reporters scrambled to record the moment. The officers hung their heads. The foreperson continued, "On the count of official misconduct, guilty." The second wave of emotional response rippled through the crowd. Jennifer gripped hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. Tears streamed down her face. Some people in the crowd nearly collapsed with relief. Others shouted in triumph, "Justice." The judge, maintaining a stern demeanor, thanked the jury and scheduled sentencing for a later date. Court officials quickly moved to restore order as the uproar threatened to spill out of the gallery. Outside, word spread like lightning, and crowds erupted in cheers and tears. Some fell to their knees, hugging strangers, a profound release of months of collective tension. Others lit candles, sang spirituals, or simply cried into each other's arms. It was a moment no one would ever forget. A tiny, fragile victory in a system where such outcomes were all too rare. Yet for the real battle, Sean's recovery, remained. A guilty verdict would not bring their boy back to health. It would not restore what was lost. That same evening, after the chaos of the courtroom, they returned to the hospital. They sat on either side of Sean's bed, clasping his hands. Fresh tears slipped down Jennifer's cheeks, but not all of them were from sorrow this time. "We got justice, baby," she murmured through her tears. "They said they're guilty." Pressed his lips to Sean's forehead. "We're going to keep fighting for you. We won't stop." And then, as if responding to his father's words, Sean's eyelids fluttered. It was so slight that at first Jennifer thought she had imagined it. She stilled, blinking away her tears, heart pounding. She whispered, voice trembling, "Did you say that?" They leaned in close. Slowly, gradually, Sean's eyes opened just a crack. The overhead fluorescent lights made him squint, and his gaze seemed unfocused. But he was awake, alive. For a moment, the entire world vanished, leaving only that hospital bed, the beep of the monitors, and the faint sound of Sean's breath. Jennifer let out a cry of overwhelming relief. His shoulders shook as tears streamed down his face. Sean blinked again, his lips parting as though trying to form words, but no sound came. It didn't matter. He was awake. A nurse rushed in, alerted by the commotion, and upon seeing the boy's open eyes, she immediately called for the doctors. Within minutes, the room was filled with medical staff assessing him, checking vitals, shining lights in his eyes. Jennifer watched, hearts bursting with hope. The following days were a blur of careful monitoring and cautious optimism. Sean was weak, drifting in and out of awareness, his words slurred when he tried to speak. The neurological damage was significant, and doctors explained that his road to recovery would be long and uncertain. He might face cognitive, speech, and motor challenges. Physical therapy was a must. But none of that dampened the joy that he was no longer trapped in the silent world of unconsciousness. As word spread that Sean had awakened, the community once again, outside the hospital, the atmosphere turned celebratory. People brought flowers, balloons, cards, homemade signs that read, "Welcome back, Sean." Volunteers set up a donations table for therapy and rehabilitation expenses. A local choir came to the hospital courtyard to sing uplifting songs. The city, still grappling with the officer's verdict and awaiting sentencing, found in Sean's awakening a beacon of hope. When Sean was strong enough to be moved to a private room, Jennifer sat by his bed and gently tried to piece together what he remembered. It was hazy, flashes of fear, bright lights shouting. He winced whenever he tried to recall the details, as though the memory itself was painful. The doctors encouraged them to let him recover at his own pace and not force traumatic recollections. So they kept their conversations light, telling him how many people were rooting for him and how proud they were of his strength. They brought him a stuffed basketball, which made him grin faintly, reminding everyone he was still the same teenager who loved the game. Meanwhile, the sentencing hearing arrived for the convicted officers. Once again, the community held its breath, fearful that a lenient sentence could undo the sense of justice they had fought for. Inside the packed courtroom, the judge recounted the officers' betrayal of public trust and the catastrophic harm inflicted on Sean, physically and emotionally. And then came the sentence. Both men received substantial prison time, though not as long as some hoped, along with an order to pay restitution that would contribute to Sean's medical and rehabilitation expenses. Opinions on the sentence varied. Some felt it was a historic step toward accountability. Others believed no number of years could balance the immense suffering inflicted on a teenager's life. But the moment was undeniably pivotal. The city had seen a measure of accountability for law enforcement wrongdoing, rare but deeply significant. It was a testament to what could happen when a community united in outrage and determination. Over the following months, Sean slowly regained more function. Physical therapy sessions were exhausting, his muscles atrophied from weeks of immobility, and his coordination hampered by neurological damage. With sweat beading on his forehead, he'd push against the therapist's instructions, fighting to stand, to take his first shaky steps. He stumbled often, but each time someone was there to catch him, his parents, a nurse, a therapist with steady hands. The therapy room's mirrored walls reflected a young man in transition, no longer the carefree, athletic teen he once was, but forging a new sense of strength in adversity. Step by step, the progress was slow yet steady. He learned to speak more clearly, to hold objects without dropping them, to walk with assistance. And through it all, the bright spark in his hazel-brown eyes gradually returned. Community members visited, sometimes in groups, wearing supportive t-shirts that read, "We are Sean's strength." In those visits, laughter and tears mingled. Sean's friends would joke about basketball games they planned to play once he got better. Teachers from his high school brought homework and well wishes from classmates, even though Sean would have to repeat much of his senior year. Church members prayed over him, and neighbors shared homemade meals with his parents. The sense of solidarity felt like a protective cocoon, reminding Sean that he was loved, that he mattered. Eventually, his story reached national circles, with interviews and human interest segments highlighting his journey. One day on a live broadcast, the anchor asked Sean, still speaking slowly, carefully, what he wanted most for the future. He paused, looked down at the wheelchair where he still sat, and then raised his gaze to the camera. I want this to matter, he said, each word a deliberate act of courage. I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. Those few sentences reverberated like a thunderclap. They signaled the birth of a young activist, one who hadn't asked for that role but had been thrust into it. Over the coming year, Sean continued his recovery, transitioning from a wheelchair to crutches to walking unaided for short distances. He re-enrolled in classes, determined to graduate. Friends around him, teachers adapted lessons for his needs, and the entire community watched his progress with pride. Meanwhile, the wave of reform that had started with the outcry over Sean's beating continued. The city council passed new regulations for police oversight, establishing a civilian review board with actual power to investigate complaints. Ongoing community police dialogues began, with attendance from both activists and officers who were earnest about building trust. It was not a perfect transformation. Change was slow, messy, and fraught with setbacks, but it was something more than lip service. It was tangible. That summer, a year after the assault, a large community event took place at the local park. It was a peace and unity festival aimed at bringing people together, reflecting on the past year, and looking toward a more hopeful future. Food trucks lined the edge of the park, children played on bounce houses, and local musicians performed on a makeshift stage. Trish Moore, ever the organizer, ensured that the day included resources for mental health support, legal aid, and youth outreach programs. It was a day of warmth, not just from the sun, but from the sense of coming together for a renewed vision of unity. Sean arrived with his parents, walking carefully but proudly without assistance. He wore a t-shirt that read, "Stronger every day." People flocked around him, offering hugs, high fives, or simply expressions of gratitude that he was still there. A hush fell when he took the stage, leaning slightly on a railing for support. His voice had improved significantly, though it was still slower than before. "Thank you for standing by me," he began, looking out at hundreds of faces, friends, neighbors, activists, and even some officers who had come in to show solidarity. "A year ago, I was fighting for my life. You all fought alongside me, and because of that, we saw that sometimes justice can be served, but we still have a long way to go." He paused, inhaling a shaky breath. "I never asked to be a symbol, but I guess that's what I am now. If you see me, see every kid who deserves to grow up safe. If you hear me, hear every parent who prays for their child won't become a hashtag." There were tears in the audience. Some folks held hands, others wiped their eyes. "We can't stop," Sean said, a hint of firmness creeping into his tone. "We have to make sure our city, our country changes. I'm just one story. There are too many others who never got justice or a chance to wake up." An uproar of applause followed, along with fervent cheers and the occasional sob. The sense of camaraderie and resolve was overwhelming. In the collective spirit of those gathered, there was an unspoken promise to keep going, to keep advocating, to keep building a safer future for all children, black, brown, or otherwise. In the months that followed, Sean continued his physical and mental rehabilitation. Some days were rough, his body still bore scars, and migraines sometimes felled him without warning. Emotionally, he wrestled with nightmares, jolting awake with the sensation of a baton striking him. Therapy sessions helped him cope, guided by a compassionate counselor who urged him to express his fears rather than bottling them up. Over time, Sean learned to find power in sharing his story, giving speeches at local high schools and youth centers. He told them it was okay to be afraid, but never okay to give up. He reminded them that voices can move mountains when they unite. The city, for its part, navigated its new reforms. The new Civilian Review Board opened investigations into several complaints, holding officers to higher standards. New training programs stressed de-escalation tactics and unbiased policing. Resistance from certain quarters remained, some officers felt unfairly targeted, certain union reps tried to undermine reforms. Yet the collective will of the people, galvanized by Sean's story, refused to back down. City council meetings were filled with engaged citizens holding leaders accountable. Newspapers published investigative pieces on department policies. Community police forums became a regular event, forging a delicate bridge of communication. Through it all, Sean's case remained a reference point, a reminder of how close the city had come to tragedy and how it had responded in unity. The city began to see a decrease in allegations of excessive force. It was not a perfect solution, entrenched issues still lingered, but an undeniable shift in consciousness had taken root. Nearly 2 years after his beating, Sean stood outside his old high school, wearing a graduation gown. The sun shone brightly, a warm breeze fluttering the tassels of the caps in the courtyard. His parents beamed with pride, cameras clicking as they captured every moment. Tears shimmered in Jennifer's eyes. Stood tall, arms folded over his chest, wearing the proud smile of a father whose son had overcome impossible odds. When Sean's name was called, the crowd burst into thunderous applause. He walked across the stage, each step purposeful. A cane assisted him slightly, but he stood straight, chin lifted. The principal handed him his diploma, tears lining her own eyes, and gave him a tight embrace. "Never forget how strong you are," she whispered into his ear, the microphone far enough that her words remained private. "I won't," he replied, smiling back. As he raised his diploma, the audience erupted in cheers. Friends shouted his name, and he glanced toward his parents, who clutched each other, almost unable to believe the miracle unfolding before them. Off to the side, he spotted Trish Moore, hands clasped in front of her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. He remembered how she fought like a lion for justice when he could not fight for himself. Their eyes locked, a silent exchange of gratitude and promise. In the swirl of the post-graduation celebration, families hugging, cameras flashing, laughter mingling with tears, Sean felt an intensity of emotion that made him tremble. He remembered the darkness he had slipped into, the weeks of floating in the void of a coma. He remembered opening his eyes to his parents' relieved faces, feeling like he had been given a second chance. And he remembered the story of how an entire community had risen up, chanting his name, demanding justice, demanding better. Later that evening, as they prepared a modest graduation celebration in their backyard, burgers on the grill, potato salad on the table, music playing softly, neighbors stopped by with warm congratulations. Sean chatted with them, still needing to rest more frequently than his peers, but beaming in the knowledge that he was surrounded by love. As twilight fell, fireflies sparkled in the air, and old friends retold memories of simpler times. Before the night ended, Sean asked for a moment of everyone's attention. He slowly stood up from his chair, leaning on his cane, and cleared his throat. About 24 guests hushed, turning their eyes to him. "I want to thank you all for everything," he said, carefully choosing his words. "For standing with me when I couldn't stand for myself, for demanding justice when I couldn't speak. You saved me. And together we saved our city from giving in to fear. I hope we never lose that spirit. We have to keep going for all the kids out there who need us." A ripple of applause followed, some wiping tears. Clapped a hand on his son's shoulder, pride radiating from him. Jennifer nodded, her face lit with maternal love. The sense of unity that had defined the past 2 years was alive and vibrant, glowing like a beacon beneath the backyard lights. In the days that followed, life began to return to a new kind of normal. Sean started planning for college, considering a major in social work or community organizing, determined to use his experience to help others. He still faced physical therapy, checkups, and the emotional aftershocks of trauma, but each step forward was a testament to resilience, the resilience of one boy, one family, and one community. Meanwhile, the city's reforms continued to evolve. The police department reported fewer complaints of excessive force, though there was still work to be done. The Civilian Review Board published periodic reports, highlighting ongoing challenges but also successes. Some officers joined the dialogue wholeheartedly, eager to rebuild trust. Others resisted the changes. But the conversation, once easily brushed aside, was now embedded in the city's conscience. Sometimes Sean would visit the spot where he was beaten, a quiet stretch of pavement that still carried ghosts of that night. The city had repaved the street, but in his mind, he could see the flickering red and blue lights, the crowd that had gathered, the terror of that final moment. Standing there, he would close his eyes, inhaling the mild city air. Then he'd exhale and open them again, reminding himself he was alive, that he had survived, and that survival was a testament to something bigger than himself. If the quiet street seemed different now, less menacing, more peaceful, it might have been an illusion, or it might have been the tangible effect of everything the community had done. Regardless, Sean chose to believe in hope. He believed in the power of speaking out, in the power of unity, and in the possibility that the future could be better, safer, more just. For a city once shaken by brutality, the legacy of that summer night took on a dual aspect. It was a reminder of the depths of injustice, but also a testament to the heights of collective will. Police beat black teen into a coma, community fights for justice, was more than a headline. It became a turning point that inspired deeper conversations, reforms, and a newfound solidarity among neighbors. It was a reckoning that forced everyone, from city officials to everyday citizens, to confront the realities of policing, racial bias, and human dignity. And through it all, Sean was at the center, a living symbol that love and determination can pry open the most stubborn doors and shine light into the darkest corners. In this reflection, Sean remained humble. He knew the path forward was still littered with hurdles, not just for him, but for communities across the nation dealing with similar issues. But he also saw how people could rally, how they could demand better. Sometimes he would quietly reread messages of support, letters from strangers across the country who had seen his story. He understood that what had happened to him was not an isolated incident. Many other families had lost loved ones, had found no justice. On the anniversary of his awakening, he organized a candlelight vigil to honor victims of police brutality, those who survived and those who did not. Hundreds of people gathered, each holding a candle that flickered in the gentle evening breeze. Some wore shirts with the names and faces of victims. A choir sang softly, and tears glistened on many cheeks. Sean stepped to the microphone and said, "We remember all those who couldn't be here tonight. Their names matter. Their stories matter. We can't let them be forgotten." With that, he began to recite a list of names, long, heartbreaking. At each name, the crowd murmured, "Present," ensuring they were remembered, if only for that moment, in solidarity and reverence. When it was over, a hush fell. Then someone in the crowd began singing, an old spiritual voice trembling but resolute. People joined in, and the single voice turned into a chorus that soared toward the night sky. In that moment, illuminated by the golden glow of candlelight, it felt as though healing and hope had taken from among them. Sean closed his eyes, letting the voices wash over him, filling every corner of his heart with a courage he promised never to lose. Yes, it had been a journey forged in pain, a brutal assault, nights spent in a coma, a family near breaking, a community tested. But in the aftermath, justice had been served in a way so few expected. And while that justice could never fully erase the trauma, it sparked a movement that swelled into something greater. As Sean once said, it wasn't just about him. This fight was about every life that deserved respect, safety, and equality. When people in distant places read about him, they often marveled at how a single teenager's suffering ignited such massive change. But those who were there, who felt every blow and cried every tear, understood it differently. It was never just one story. It was the collective anguish of a community that had been waiting for a reason to stand up and speak out, armed with phones, courage, and unity. And stand up they did, proving that with enough determination, even the mightiest barriers can crack under the force of love and solidarity. As time moved on and Sean prepared for the next chapter, college, continued therapy, and a budding passion for social justice, he carried with him both the scars and the lessons of that fateful night. He lived each day with a profound sense of purpose. Sometimes, in his quiet moments, he'd revisit the worst memories and then deliberately focus on the unwavering support that had saved him. In that juxtaposition, violence and compassion, hate and love, he found a profound truth. Change is a fragile thread woven through the collective choices of people who refuse to yield to despair. And as long as communities chose to rise, to fight, to stand together, there was always hope for a brighter dawn.